It's been an interesting few years, hasn't it? Really a couple of decades now. If we go back, we think about life, what it was like in 2006, we would be living in a world without the iPhone. Because that came out in 2007, and that changed the world as we know it. I mean, before they had other things like the BlackBerry, they had iPods and such. They had PDAs. Does anybody remember PDAs? You guys remember those things? Okay. Right? They had those kinds of things. They had beepers. But nothing was like the iPhone. It changed the world as we know it. We've got pretty much any and everything that we could ever want in the palm of our hands, whether it's an iPhone or whether it's an Android, whatever it might be. It changed the entire world. A couple of years before then, another life-changing event happened. YouTube was invented. And we can use YouTube for just about any and everything that we would ever want. We want to watch little silly cat videos, we go to YouTube. If we want to figure out how in the world we can build a skyscraper in our backyard, we could probably find that on YouTube too, right? Everything that we were looking for, going to be on YouTube. Life has changed over the last few years. In fact, we could even look at this world, and just in the last month, especially in the United States, we see that life dramatically changed because we got to see a president who faltered on a debate stage, and then at the same time, or within a week or so, we see another presidential candidate that almost lost his life, and then the one that faltered ends up giving up his campaign completely. That's never happened before. Those three events have never happened in the course of American history before. And we can look at these events, whether it's from all of a sudden the life-changing world of YouTube or the smartphone or even the last month, we can go, this world seems to be spinning out of control. Some things we might like, it might be exhilarating. Some things we hate, we're confounded by. We might even be worried about them. This life has changed. Within the course of a decade, we find out that the Supreme Court says, yeah, homosexuality, that homosexuals can be married nationwide, and then also at the same time, within a few years, they're saying, but abortion is no longer a nationwide issue, it's a state's issue. Things flip-flop. So much change in so little time. And if we're not careful, it can lead us into the temptation to escape this world. And I'm not talking necessarily about becoming a hermit. I'm not necessarily talking about going into the desert somewhere to escape, becoming a monk. I'm not talking about that. We just have other means of escape. Or we also have that temptation then to just go all in. We can't turn off the news. We can't stop searching the internet. We have to be concerned about everything, everywhere, at all times. We have those two polar differences. But those are temptations that Jesus says that we must avoid. This morning, Jesus is ending what is often called the Olivet Discord. And in so doing, he is giving us two warnings. And these two warnings are really actually also two commands that he is giving to us. The first one is that we ought to really be watching in. We are to watch in. The second one, very much like it, but a little bit different, we are to, of course, watch out. Watch in and watch out. So if you will, please stand with me for the honor of the reading of God's Word. We're going to be looking at the last few verses 34 to 38 here this morning. But watch yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the cares of this life. And that day come upon you suddenly like a trap. For it will come upon all who dwell on the face of the whole earth. But stay awake at all times, praying that you may have strength to escape all these things that are going to take place and to stand before the Son of Man. And every day he was teaching in the temple, but at night he went out and lodged on the mount called Olivet. And early in the morning, all the people came to him in the temple to hear him. And we're not really going to deal with those two last verses. You can have a seat. We're not really going to be dealing with those two last verses here this morning. But suffice it to say that Jesus did not go back to Mary and Martha's house and Lazarus' house to spend the night. He actually camped out on the Mount of Olivet. Mount of Olives. Okay? He didn't stay in Jerusalem where his life was being threatened, but he did go back every single day to continuously teach. They did not trust the people at night, and so he left. That being said, let's get into the text that we're going to really deal with. The first warning that Jesus gave to his disciples, and therefore us who are fellow disciples of these gentlemen, is really to watch in. Now, we don't usually say it that way, but that's, I wanted to be pithy. I wanted you guys to remember this, right? So we watch in, and then we watch out. We look at ourselves from within. Jesus actually wants us to keep a close eye on our own hearts. And to do that really means that we need to watch inwardly. We need to watch in before we actually begin to watch out. So we go back to verse 34 here, but watch yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and cares of this life, and that day come upon you suddenly like a trap. So we are supposed to then look inwardly. That's not usually something that you're going to hear in a conservative Baptist church with a conservative pastor preaching, but that's what Jesus is saying. Therefore, that's what I'm saying to you guys is, first off, look inwardly before you start to look outwardly. The difference is that when we are talking about looking inwardly, we're not talking about looking inwardly like much of the world starts to talk about looking inwardly. Most of the world, when they say look inward, they're talking about find the answer within yourself. It's all there. It's all good. You just got to find it, right? That's not what I'm saying. That's not certainly what Jesus was saying. When we look inwardly, we're looking at something different. Jesus tells us that we are supposed to look inwardly in order to protect our own hearts from being weighed down. In other words, we have to be careful by looking at our hearts, right? If our hearts were hotels, we are the first ones. We are those people at the front desk. We're the front desk people, guest service people, and we're not letting certain things check into our hearts, right? That's what Jesus is saying. We need to be on guard. We need to be looking inwardly, because there are certain things that are going to weigh us down. So we have to watch ourselves, watch in, so that we wouldn't be weighed down. But exactly what does it mean when Jesus says to be weighed down? Because that can mean a whole lot of different things. What does it mean to be weighed down? Because to be weighed down in heart might mean something different to you than it actually meant to Jesus. Because when I first had read and was studying, at first I thought, okay, we don't want to have a heavy heart. That's what it kind of sounds like when we have a weighed down heart. Well, maybe we don't want to have a heavy heart. Jesus is keeping us from having a heavy heart. We don't want to be sad. We want to be joyous. But that's really not what Jesus is saying here. It's not the idea that Jesus is trying to convey. The idea that Jesus is trying to convey is kind of like the same idea that the writer of Hebrews is trying to convey in Hebrews chapter 12, when he says that we are supposed to let go of every weight of sin that would keep us from running the race. When our hearts are weighed down, it's not so much that they're heavy and sad, so much as it is that there are things that are keeping us from being prepared for the second coming of Christ. They're keeping us back. They're holding us down. To weigh down doesn't mean the soul is sad. It is to be ill prepared for what's ahead, namely the coming of Christ. And he gives us two examples of how this might happen. Technically, he gives us three, but we're going to lump two of them together. One is simply just that we don't care really at all, or we try to escape, that kind of thing, what's going on in this world. And the other is that we actually get so involved in this world that we lose sight of what's going on, of what's to come. So let's talk about that first one first, because, to start at the beginning, as Mary would say, is what? It's a very good place to start. You got to bone up on your musicals here, right? Sound of Music, Mary Von Trapp. Let's start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. Okay, so we're going to start at the beginning. We're going to start with the first one that he talks about trying to escape, about trying to really just become disassociated from this world, to kind of forget about what's going on, like as if nothing really matters. It's not really important at all. That first weighty matter that he wants us to avoid living is that nothing matters, or we need to escape from it. And it is characterized by dissipation or drunkenness and drunkenness. We don't use the word dissipation very much in today's world. We use a completely different word that will probably help us out. The Greek equivalent, or what we would see to be the equivalent, might be more like a hangover. We ought not to try to escape through our hangovers, right? In other words, having had been drunk, maybe waiting for another binger later on this evening, right? So last night, yes, but maybe not right now this morning. Right now we're experiencing the effects of it, and so we've got the headache, and we've got the tiredness, we might even have the nausea, and that kind of thing. So he says, neither through being drunk nor through getting a hangover are we to try to escape, or what we are trying to do is avoid what's going on in this world as if it doesn't matter at all. We don't want to be weighed down with those kinds of things. The excessive drinking and the waking up with the hangover are the instruments that are going to weigh down our hearts. Hence, it's what we would call the instrumental case in the Greek. Let me ask you a question. If you needed to get a certain nail into a certain board, what instrument would you use in order to do that? A hammer. Very good. Very good. If you wanted to do surgery on somebody, and you needed to do an incision, what kind of instrument would you use in order to cut them open? A scalpel. It's very good, right? So in this case, those are the instruments, right? And so they are the instrumental case. We are using these certain things. So if we are trying to escape the world, if we are trying to then pretend like nothing matters in the world, Jesus says there are a couple of instruments that we might use. One is drunkenness, and the other one, very much like it, is just getting hungover. Having been drunk, so that our minds don't have to really deal with what's going on in this world. Those are the instruments by which we can use alcohol to the excess. And it weighs the heart down. It makes us ill-prepared for his coming. Now, alcohol in and of itself is a depressant. By its own nature, it slows things down. It actually does weigh things down. It delays reaction time. And if used to the excess, it can certainly make a person groggy. It can make a person sleepy. And if it's used to the ultra excess, then it certainly can just make a person pass out, blackout. One who drinks to excess forgets or ignores that there is more to life in that very moment and in the very near future than what's in that bottle or what's in that glass. He's kind of like that person, that man that Jesus told about in his parable about the rich farmer who wanted to build more barns, more silos, where he says something to the effect of, "And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry," as if nothing else matters. We're good to go. Jesus says we don't need to do that. We need to be very careful. We need to look inside ourselves, make sure that our heart's not being weighed down by this kind of thinking. But it's not just alcohol. Right? It's not just alcohol to the excess that we're talking about here. It can certainly apply to other things that we are doing to the excess, things that we use to escape this world. Again, we're not talking about becoming a monk. We're not talking about becoming a hermit anywhere. We're talking about ways that we try to escape from the realities of this world so we don't have to deal with anything, so we don't have to worry about this world, because that's what we're concerned about, is it not? All the worries and the anxieties that this world brings, we want to stop those things. So it can be excessive eating. It can be excessive shopping. It could be excessive kitty cat videos. Okay? Anything that really is beginning to take our eyes off of the kingdom, off of being prepared for Christ, off of the actual hope that Jesus offers to us, that can be an intoxicating thing. And Jesus says we need to be really careful. We need to be looking out. We need to watch inwardly for any substance that we are using to escape the realities of this world. Because we will not be ready, we cannot be ready, so long as that's where our eyes are focused. So long as those take residency in our hearts. We can't be ready for that second coming. We're living as if nothing really matters. And if nothing really matters, then the second coming, Christ's return, that doesn't matter either. But it's not just that. It's not just living as if nothing really matters, trying to escape it all, but living as if everything matters. Diving headfirst into this world of worry and excess. Verse 34 tells us that we are not supposed to be weighed down by the cares of this life. The cares of this life. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, it really ought to. Because it's the same saying, it's the same words that Jesus used way back when he was talking in Luke chapter 8, when he was talking about the thorny soil. It's his explanation of what the thorny soil was. Look at chapter 8, verse 14 if you want to. It's going to be up here. And as for what fell among the thorns, they are also those who hear, but as they go on their way, they are choked by the cares and riches and pleasures of life, that their fruit does not mature. That word that Jesus used for the cares in verse 14 is the same word that he uses here in verse 34. It really means to worry. It means to have anxiety about. It's not like what we care for our children. It is worry, it is anxiety. It's the same word that Jesus would later use in Luke chapter 12 when he says that we are not supposed to have anxiety, we're not supposed to have cares, we're not supposed to worry about what we will eat or what we will drink or what we will wear. Those things we're not supposed to be worried about. So it's that same word here. And then that second word there, the life word that we see in verse 14, chapter 8, verse 14. It's very similar to the word that we have in verse 34. One is bios, one is biotikos. The difference between those words is just that one, bios, is a noun, biotikos is an adjective. That's all it is. They're the same word, basically. It just simply means the stuff of this life. Same word that John used in 1 John chapter 2, verse 16. The pride of life, the pride of our stuff. All this stuff in life that we are worried about, it weighs us down. And therefore we are ill prepared for the second coming. We're not looking for it. We're too busy for it. In fact, the parable of the soil says it's not just that we are ill prepared, but it can choke our faith. Dr. Richard Caldwell is pastor at Founders Baptist Church in Texas, in Houston, Texas. And I came across this on Instagram this week, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. That's awesome. So I'm going to share it with you. He said, could it be that God did not wire us to carry every event taking place in every part of the world at every moment as if it were ours? Could it be that technology has produced a faux omniscience and omnipresence that is hurting mankind and not helping it? Many hearts are weighed down by this faux omniscience and omnipresence. And Jesus says, he warns us that we are not to live as if nothing matters, right, through escapism, but we're also not to live as if everything matters so that we become so worried about it that we can't focus on anything else. Either way, we are not ready for his return. We are not preparing ourselves. We are not preparing our neighbors. We are not preparing our families for the second coming, for the redemption of our souls and our bodies. In fact, his return is going to be more like a trap than it is liberation. Jesus has been warning us and telling us this prophecy we've been looking at it for the last 4 weeks now. Not 4 years. Whew, that would be a long time. 4 weeks is long enough. 4 years? Whew. All right. 4 weeks, though, we have been looking at this prophecy of Jesus not so that we are fearful, but so that we become faithful, correct? That's the idea here. Not so that we get trapped, but so that we feel the liberation of the hope of the second coming. He says if we are so focused through escapism or through jumping in, through worry, it's still going to be a trap. It's going to come at you like a trap, not a liberating hope. Rather than seeing the signs with clear eyes that are not glazed over with intoxicants or closed out of fear, but open and bright in order to see the unmistakable signs of his return, we're going to be caught off guard. We will never have received the hope and the courage that those signs are supposed to bring for this life, this moment, if we're not watching out for it. And we start watching out for it by watching inwardly as to what is going into our own hearts. For it will come upon all, Jesus says, who dwell on the face of the whole earth. It's coming. That's the promise. It's coming on everybody. But we can be ready for it, and we can find hope in it, so long as we are searching out our own hearts, watching in before we begin to watch out. But that's the second part. So watching in, if watching in is the first warning, the first command that Jesus gives us, the second one is then to watch out. We do need to actually look outwardly as well. Look inwardly to see what's weighing down our hearts, what's weighing down our souls, our spirits, but then to watch out, to look outwardly as we begin to move forward spiritually. So we look at verse 36. Look again at verse 36 here. But stay awake at all times, praying that you may have strength to escape all these things that are going to take place and to stand before the Son of Man. So the words stay awake actually mean that we are supposed to actually get sleep. I know it's kind of weird how they translated it, right? It's like the idea, though, is to catch up on our sleep. It's those two words, catch and sleep. Catch up on your sleep so that when the time comes, which is now, to stay awake, we are ready to stay awake. We're ready to watch out. The idea, again, is like being a watchman. A watchman that has to stay up all night long in the watchtower to see if there is any suspicious activity going on, whether inside the camp or outside the camp. That's what they're supposed to do. So before they ever get to the watchtower in the first place, they're supposed to have gotten plenty of sleep so that it's not hard for them to stay awake and stay alert to watch out when they actually get in to do their job. Jesus says that's how we're supposed to be inwardly, spiritually. We are supposed to be ready, taking our rest in Him, that we may be spiritually awake to be able to be a good watchman, to watch out as to what's going on in our lives and in our world and those things that are around us. Look out for the suspicious activity. And in context of what we're reading about, that suspicious activity would actually be the signs of the times. Jerusalem, of course, is going to be razed. Temple's going to be set on fire. Ultimately, Jesus is going to return the sun, moon, and stars. Again, I said I truly believe those are spiritual darkness. That's the spiritual darkness coming upon our world. It just gets darker and darker, more and more chaotic. We're supposed to be watching out for those things. Staying alert so that we are ready for the second coming. That's within the context of things. But I also want to bring something that's out of context. So I'm already telling you right off the bat, this is out of context, but it's still a place in the Scriptures where we are told to watch out. We are also supposed to be watching out for our adversary, the devil, who walks around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. We need to be watching out for those things too. So we look inwardly to see what is keeping us from looking outwardly. And then we turn our attention to those things that are outward activities. But then how are we supposed to stay awake? What is it that keeps us awake? Do you see it there in the text? Let's go back to verse 36. But stay awake at all times. What's that next word? praying. We actually stay awake by praying. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing to think about if you stop and think about it, right? We're supposed to stay awake. How many of you ever been praying and fell asleep? Raise your hand. Right? Now, keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. How many of you, I'm going to embarrass you even further now. How many of you ever have fallen asleep praying during a prayer meeting or during church? Go ahead, keep your hands up. Liars. Don't be lying in church. No, it's okay. Right? I have. Sorry, I know. I had not gotten enough sleep. I had not caught up on my sleep, right? So it's happened. It's happened. Not often, but it has happened, right? And so it's kind of weird. If we think about it, it's like, okay, you're closing your eyes, you're bowing your head, you're folding your hands, right? Your head's down, everything like that, right? And it's like, okay, that's the way that you're supposed to stay awake. You're like, that seems counterintuitive. Of course, that's not necessarily how we always need to be praying, but it certainly is, Jesus says, we stay awake by praying. Because we know that in praying, we are doing spiritual warfare. By prayer, we are engaging, and we are looking out. Prayer is a spiritual act. It is a spiritual matter. By the way, if you do fall asleep in prayer, people always ask me this, is it a bad thing? And I'm like, what better place to fall asleep in than the arms of your Father, right? I mean, I know that sounds a little sappy, but seriously though, we are praying to our Father. He is there in our presence. What better place to fall asleep? That's great that he has given us the ability, right? God grants sleep to those whom he loves, right? A better place. Anyway, neither here nor there. We pray because it's a spiritual battle. And we need to stay awake spiritually. We need to be able to stay awake that way. So today, many Christians, though, many evangelical Christians, are so busy, though, trying to stay awake by looking at the news and trying to figure out who the Antichrist might be. They're looking for any group that might, rush the Dome of the Rock and tear down the mosque and build a second or a third temple there. They're so busy looking out for the Euphrates River to dry up or trying to count how many actually are in China's army now, right? There's so many people doing those kinds of things that they're forgetting that Jesus is actually saying you stay awake not by doing those things, but by praying, by coming to the Father, by coming to him, and seeking him out. That's how we watch out. We're not so much interested in praying. We're not so much tempted to pray. We are tempted to do just about everything but prayer. And if James is right that we are tempted when we are lured and enticed by our own desires, what does it mean about our prayer lives? If we're not being tempted to go to God in prayer, could it be that we really have no desire for prayer in the first place? We're supposed to be praying because the battle is much more spiritual than it is physical. Yeah, there's going to be wars, there's going to be rumors of wars, that kind of thing. There's the raising of Jerusalem and the temple, right? Absolutely. But there are more subtler aspects to this fight than those things, because the darkness is coming. There is fear that is going on all around us. Chaos is ensuing. Those are not physical things. They are seen physically, but they are not physical things. Those are spiritual matters. And if we're not dealing with it on a spiritual level, we will be caught off guard. And all of a sudden, we will allow these things to take residency in our hearts. We can be overcome in a heartbeat. And so the sentiment that Jesus is putting forth here, the idea that Jesus is putting forth here really echoes the same thing that he would later tell the disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane. Remember what he says in the Garden of Gethsemane? He's gone over there, he is praying, he's told the disciples to pray. He comes back to find them asleep, and he said to them, why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into, what's that last word? How is it that they are going to stay awake spiritually? Through prayer. So notice that there is an actual way of escape here. We like to play escapism. We like to figure it out. We like to put it in our own hands. How are we going to escape? How are we going to stop feeling the dread of this world and all the stuff of this world? How is it that we're going to do that? We're going to do that through escapism. We're going to watch too many videos. We're going to drink too much alcohol. We're going to do some drugs. We're going to do whatever it is. We're going to start doing those things in order to escape. And yet Jesus has already given us the means of escape. Let's go back to verse 36. But stay awake at all times, praying that you have the strength, what's the next two words? To escape. There is a means of escape. It's through prayer. And some of us may have just inwardly rolled our eyes by me saying that. We kind of get annoyed by it. Chris, prayer doesn't fix everything. You should know that. I do know that. It doesn't fix everything. But man, it sure does fix a whole lot more than we ever give it credit for. And when I say we, I mean I. Because I'll try means of escape. I'm an escapist. I am such an escape artist. Jesus says there's the means of escape through prayer. It's usually not the first thing that comes to mind when I want to escape things. It's not up there in the temptations list. Usually there are things that are going to weigh my heart down and cause me to be ill prepared. Rarely are there things there that are going to lift up my heart. But it's not just simply the escape, as great as that's going to be, as great as that is. It's even more importantly that Jesus says that this prayer, this staying awake through prayer, that is preparing us to be able to stand before the Son of Man, before Him when He returns. Prayer makes us ready for Jesus' return. So rather than being ill-prepared because of living a life where nothing matters or maybe everything matters, we will be well prepared because we are living a life of prayer. We're living a life where prayer matters. Our souls matter. Rather than weighing down our hearts with the cares of this world, we are lightening them up with the hopes of the next. Matthew Henry put it this way. He said, "Those shall be accounted worthy to live a life of praise in the other world that live a life of prayer in this world." Read that one more time. "Those shall be accounted worthy to live a life of praise in the other world that live a life of prayer in this world." I quickly want to go over a prayer that I think can help us prepare for Jesus coming again. This is not a mantra. Don't get me wrong. This is not a mantra that I want to go over. This is a psalm that I want to go over. But I think it can help us prepare for Jesus' coming and overcome the panic or the desire to escape or the cares of this world. It comes out of Psalm 131. So let's go there, Psalm 131. It's a very short psalm. He says, "O Lord, my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvelous for me. But I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forevermore." In these three short verses, we have David praying a prayer of peace. It actually begins with the result. The first couple of verses are the result. The last is how he got to the result by way of invitation. Right? He's explaining it in way of invitation. Basically, he is inviting people to do what he has done. Hope in the Lord. Israel, hope in the Lord. Hope in Yahweh. David's hope is in the Lord for the temporal and for the eternal, from this moment forth, from this time forth, and forevermore. So my hope is in the Lord from this moment forward, for all of eternity. And because that's where my hope lies, I have peace. Well, that's nice. Wish that we would all be able to say that. If we read, though, Psalm 131, we go through it again, right? We really ought to. We're not going to, but I would encourage you to go back and read the previous psalm, because these are kind of like sister psalms. Psalm 130 to 131. Read those together. Because there we see that David is casting his hope in the Lord. And he is calling on Israel over and over again to cast their hope upon the Lord. So we see that in Psalm 130, and then he says it again in Psalm 131. It's as if these are kind of a medley. But by hoping in the Lord, by putting his trust in the Lord and Yahweh, David does not think of himself too highly. His heart is not lifted up. In other words, there isn't pride there, as if to say, I've got to do this on my own. At the same time, he says that it's not just simply that I don't have pride, neither is he not just thinking about himself, but he doesn't see himself as being more important than others. Eyes lifted too high. In other words, haughty eyes, looking down on others as if they're beneath David. Because his hope is in the Lord, he does not occupy himself with things, with matters that are too great and too marvelous for him. Now stop and think for a minute, because what David is not talking about here, though it could be included, is like stuff that we would consider to be like rocket science. That's too great for us. Most of us would not be able to deal with things that pertain to rocket science. We would not be able to do with a lot of stuff in the medical field. We probably wouldn't want to be lawyers. Those things are too high, too great for us, right? They're above our pay grade kind of thing, right? That's not what David is saying here. In context, thinking it in context, he says, I am not prideful, and I am not haughty eyes. I am not seeing myself as too great, and I am not seeing others as less than myself. Therefore, I am not putting things in front of me that are too great, too much for me. In other words, my life and how I deal and try to take control of the things in my life, those things that I have no control over, which is 99.9% of the things in my life, I am not worried. I am not concerning myself on those things. And the things that are in my brother and sister's life, the things that I feel like I have to take control of, the things that I want to do, the things that I say, no, I've got the answer. I must have the answer. I must be the answer to your prayer. I have to be that way. I have to fix your life. Those things I don't concern myself with. That's not my responsibility. It's God's responsibility. Do we not go around thinking that we have to control our lives, and if not our own, we have to control other people's lives? Because we are filled up, we are puffed up, our hearts are too big. We live with pride. I've got to be strong enough. I have to be wise enough. I have to be clever enough to deal with these issues that are coming on me in my life that I have no control over. And so what does it do? It causes me to worry. It causes me to have anxiety. Oh, but what about these people in my life? I've got to fix their problems too. Every time that they come to me and they just want to talk, I got to fix it. And then I wonder, did I fix it? I can't get worried. I have anxiety. The things that are going on in the nation right now, all the turmoil and all the chaos that's going on in the nation, we're more divided than ever before, it seems like. It's what we keep being told. Whoever says that has not done their history of the United States, right? I'm just saying, just throwing that out there, right? All the wars and the rumors of wars, everything that's going on with Hamas and Hezbollah and Israel and Ukraine and Russia, and we're concerned about those things. Those are too great, too marvelous for us. Why are we concerning ourselves about those things? Because pride and haughtiness. David says, I've given those things up because my hope is in the Lord. And he says this is But I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother. Now, you moms, if you've ever nursed and then it's time to stop nursing, you probably know what David's talking about here. Baby hasn't been weaned yet, but it's time to start. And so you pick up your baby, and you're sitting there, and you put your baby on your lap, and that baby just goes nuts because he thinks it's time to eat. And so he starts to squirm, and he starts to lay back and trying to lay back. You won't let him lay back, and so then he starts getting all agitated and crying and starts flailing everywhere because he knows what he's supposed to have. And you're not giving it to him. And it can go on like that until the baby has learned that you will feed him and you will care for him, even if it's not in the way that he is expecting. And so a weaned child, one that has learned to trust, can sit on a mom's lap calmly and quietly. And David says, I've learned to do that because my hope is in the Lord. And he says, Israel, or we could say today, Christian, would you join me in placing your hope in the Lord? That's what he wants. That kind of praying, that kind of trust, that prepares us to stand before the Son of Man. Brothers and sisters, as we are finishing up with Luke 21 this morning, we've seen what we are being called to do. We are giving a warning, but it's not just a warning. These are commands. They're commands. Let that just kind of sink in. It's not just that Jesus is worried about us. He is. I mean, he wants us to, he's warning us, hey, don't do these things, right? They're also commands. To not do these things then is to break the command, which is then to, of course, sin. Now, don't get me wrong. Jesus' blood covers every sin. But every command is for our own good, and it stems from the love of Christ. It stems from the love of God. And this is his loving care over us. Next week, we're getting into the last part of Luke, which is where the exciting part, the scary part, whatever you want to say, right? Because that's when we see the Last Supper and we see the Judas's betrayal and the garden, and then we see Peter's denial and Jesus' arrest, trial, crucifixion, and then his resurrection. If ever there is a time that there was darkness on this earth, it was at that moment. When everything seems to be chaotic, Jesus has just had the Last Supper, had Passover with his disciples, made an everlasting covenant with them, only to see one deny him, one betray him, and they all abandon him. And yet we look back as readers of this. We look back and we remember it as horrible as it was. We actually remember it fondly. We celebrate it. Every week we observe the Lord's Supper to remember what Jesus did at that very moment in time when he was about to be betrayed, when darkness was at its darkest level. We honor it. We celebrate it because we understand that God was at work even at the darkest moments of life. Wouldn't it be great if we could do that without hindsight? Wouldn't it be great if we did that with foresight? As we walk into those dark moments, those chaotic moments, and go, Lord, I trust you, and I hope in you. And how it all works out, those things, those are matters too great for me to concern myself with. I'm walking in this knowing you are fully in control. Wouldn't that be a great response? What if we trusted God ahead of time and not just in hindsight? What if we were able to hope in God and his control in the midst of suffering and not just simply celebrate it when it's over? It is possible when we watch in and watch out. When we stop pretending like nothing matters or that everything matters and start praying for the strength and for our standing. Because these aren't just warnings. These are commands. Let's pray.